Hi, it's Dr. Gemma, and we're continuing our series on good habits to promote healthy sleep. And today we're talking mostly about food habits. And before I start, I want to remind you that since I'm talking about food and ingestion and all that, I'm going to be talking about how much water and what not you should drink. So please, you should feel free to talk any of this over with your medical doctor. That there may be conditions that are specific to you that I don't know about, and you should be talking to your doctor or consulting. You should feel free to show him any or all of this and review it with him or her and say, what do you think? Okay. But please keep in mind, I can't make medical recommendations here. And I'm talking to a fairly healthy audience physically when I talk about some of this, all right? So in other words, please consult your physician, all right, and do not self-diagnose. Having said that, so we're talking about habits related to sleep that are around the issue of how you eat, all right? Now let's talk about how you eat and what goes on. First of all, when you eat, food goes in here, comes out the tail end, all right? Goes in here, you got basically a nice big hose pipe called the esophagus that drops into your stomach. And that process, basically from mouth to leaving the stomach, takes about 3 hours. At the very bottom of the stomach, there's a valve called the pyloric valve. Once your food gets past the pyloric valve into the small intestine, it cannot come back, okay? And that whole thing is important because from here to pyloric valve takes about 3 hours in most people. And that's going to matter because that's going to strongly affect the quality of your sleep or if you can even sleep. Now, that's the easy part. When food drops into your stomach, it drops into basically a vat of 12 molar, which is, in other words, highly concentrated hydrochloric acid. And the job of the hydrochloric acid is to start the food breaking down. The hydrochloric acid is kept in the stomach. That's what the pyloric valve is doing. It's stopping it from leaking whole hog into the small intestine, which can take it in smaller amounts, but not full bore, okay? But at the top of the stomach, there isn't a valve. It's basically relying on gravity to keep the acid in your stomach. Your esophagus is heavily lined and very thick and very well reinforced, but it's really not meant to have hydrochloric acid, particularly 12 molar hydrochloric acid in it. So once you lie down to sleep, you lose the advantage of gravity. So if you have food stuck in your stomach that didn't get through the pyloric valve, your stomach is going to do two things. One, it's going to keep releasing acid. As long as your stomach senses the weight of food in it, it will keep releasing more acid to break the food down. And once you lie down, now there's no gravity, so the acid can go backwards up into your esophagus, and it can eat through the esophagus, and that will cause you acid reflux or GERD. So when you go to sleep, on top of all of this, digestion stops. So what does all this mean? It means if I eat at 9 o'clock and I go to bed at 10 o'clock, the food is still not down to the pyloric valve. It's stuck somewhere in my stomach digesting. My stomach, therefore, is not going to let me sleep. It's going to try to keep me awake because my stomach, at some level, wants the food to leave it. But suppose I just override it. I just lie down and sleep anyway because I'm so tired I've had a long day. Well, now my stomach is stuck with a load of food and it can't get the food past the pyloric valve. So the stomach keeps signaling me to stay awake. And if I manage to fall asleep, it's going to give me lousy quality sleep. But there's more. It's also going to leak acid up into my esophagus. And so I'm going to be at risk of developing acid reflux, alias gastroesophageal reflux disorder, GERD. All right. So it is really important that my body is trying to stop me from doing this. So if I eat midnight snacks, for example, I'm in trouble because I won't be able to sleep. My body's going to keep me awake, and if my body can't keep me awake, I'm unfortunately going to develop acid reflux, which is very, very painful to the point where it's often mistaken for a heart attack because the level of pain in the chest can be so intense. All right, so the first thing I just said in disguise there, the first strategy is you don't get to eat midnight snacks. That if you're eating in the middle of the night, you're just begging for acid reflux. You're also begging for very troubled, very poor quality sleep. But there's more. As I said, it takes 3 hours to go from here to the pyloric valve. So that means you can't eat for 3 hours before you go to sleep. So, as I've told you before, I go to bed at 10 o'clock. I expect to fall asleep at 10 o'clock. That means I cannot eat after 7 p.m. because if I do, I'm going to have food stuck midway to the pyloric valve in my stomach somewhere, or possibly in my esophagus, all right? And so I am just begging for a problem. So the first two rules here, we don't eat midnight snacks. And the second rule is, in fact, we have no food for at least 3 hours before sleep. So bed at 10 p.m. means you stop eating by 7 p.m. Some people get lucky. There are people who can push it a little bit. I have gotten away with eating 2.5 hours before sleep. But I would recommend, if you want to know that for yourself, you start with 3 hours and see if that works. Because there are some people who can't eat for 4 hours before sleep. But 3 seems to be about average. So you try it at 3 hours. If you get away with that and you want to find out if you can push it, all right, maybe you'll try it at 2 3/4 hours before sleep. But be careful, because this is a pretty uncomfortable thing to experiment with. Better safe than sorry. No food for 3 hours before sleep. Now, and this is one that's a little more dicey. You need to limit the water that you drink as much as you can for about an hour before sleep. Now, if you have medications that you have to take at bedtime, you can hear the problem, consult your doctor. If you are dehydrated, consult your doctor, all right? But mostly, if you're getting up in the middle of the night to pee, it's because you drank too much water right before you went to bed. However, there's another one. If you're diabetic, you may be peeing in the middle of the night as well. So if you're peeing in the middle of the night and you're not drinking before bed, please talk to your doctor and please have your blood sugar checked, okay? One of the things you should know is that your bladder the control of your bladder is somewhat moderated by insulin. You know insulin. Insulin is the hormone that you get problems with when you have diabetes, okay? So if you're peeing in the middle of the night and you don't think you're drinking water right before bed, then yeah, you may be looking at some kind of insulin problem. So you may be insulin sensitive, you may be pre-diabetic, you may be diabetic. So if that is happening, please talk to your medical doctor. But in the meantime, if you're healthy as far as you know, you want to limit the water that you drink before bed as much as you can, certainly within the last hour before sleep. It's very typical. You drink a lot of water because you're thirsty, you go down, you lie down to sleep, and you'll be peeing like 10, 15 minutes later, all right? So please limit your water intake. You might as well just forget juice. If you're going to drink juice, that's going to load you up with sugar before you go to bed, and I'm going to come back to that. But please, you shouldn't be drinking anything but water anyway that late in the evening, and you want to keep yourself from drinking too much or drinking too close to the time you lie down. Now, caffeine. After 12 noon, basically you should be avoiding caffeine. Yes, there are some of you, and you're probably under 30 years old, who are going, I can drink all the caffeine I want. Well, that's lovely. But mostly, if you're having sleep problems, caffeine is not your friend. You should be limiting your caffeine anyway. But you certainly should not be drinking it after 12 noon because your body's not going to have time to process it. Sorry about that. If you're drinking a lot of caffeine after 12 noon, please try cutting it back gradually, because otherwise you're going to have headaches and all sorts of withdrawal responses, all right? And again, this is a good one. If you feel you're really addicted to caffeine, talk to your doctor about how to cut back. But the rule of thumb for sleep hygiene is usually no caffeine after 12 noon. There are a lot of things you can drink that they will not give you the buzz, but they will make you feel like you're drinking caffeine, or they will taste like caffeine. There's chicory coffee, which I find very unsatisfying, but some people love. There's rooibos tea, R-O-I-B as in boy, O-S, or redbush tea, or African red leaf tea, okay? Rooibos does not have caffeine, but it tastes like it does. It's delicious stuff. And so you can always have rooibos tea to help make up for, I want a hot drink, but I can't drink caffeine. There's a thing called Creo Brew, and somebody on my Instagram channel brought this up, that you can have cocoa. You have to be careful. There's a certain amount of caffeine in it, but if you want to avoid the caffeine altogether, you can have cacao, which is sold in America under a brand name Creo Brew. Creo Brew tastes like a weak, watery chocolate to me because there's no sugar in it like our most American cocos and chocolate. Okay, and you cook it just like coffee. And if you add cream, and I use stevia, I don't use sugar, but if you add those to it, Creo Brew tastes pretty close. I use heavy whipping cream in it. Creo Brew tastes pretty close to hot cocoa. The nice thing is, chocolate and cacao get their zing from a chemical called theobromide they have a limited amount of caffeine. It's mostly theobromide. Theobromide will give you a lift, and it will make you feel a little bit more lively. However, it doesn't last the way caffeine does. So you can substitute CreoBrew or some kind of cacao concoction for your coffee. You have to be careful. If you use like a hot cocoa mix, it's going to have a lot of sugar, and that's the next hint, because not only do you need to avoid caffeine after 12 noon, you really need to cut back your intake of white sugar. White sugar does so many bad things to your body, it's not funny. And the more we study it, the worse it gets. But in the short term, white sugar, it's like igniting a match versus lighting a log of firewood. Firewood burns very, very slowly. White sugar is the match. It goes foof and burns really fast. So in your bloodstream, when you eat white sugar, your blood sugar goes way up and then drops sharply, all right? That will interfere with your sleep. When it goes way up, you're getting buzzed, you get too excited. When it goes way down, you're going to experience it as depression. Your body reads that sudden drop as an emotional problem. And then your brain, handy little creature that it is, will say what all brains say in humans. It says, suddenly I feel really lousy. And then it will try to explain to you why. That's your forebrain. Your forebrain senses the lousy feelings and says, if I feel this bad, there must be a problem. And your forebrain will then talk you into believing that some minor problem is much bigger than it is, and now you're lying there worrying so much for sleep. Okay? So what I'm trying to say is you really need to cut back on your intake of white sugar, or like some of us, not use it at all. Remember, there are perfectly good sweeteners like stevia, oligosaccharides, swerve, erythritol. You want to avoid sugar alcohols, except oligosaccharides. They're not technically alcohols, but they're okay. Erythritol is okay, even though it has the alcohol ending on it. You want to be very careful, though, because they sell a lot of things and say neutral glycemic index, and they aren't. You want brand name Swerve, as in swerving in a car when you're a little drunk. Yeah, Swerve is the brand name you're looking for. Stevia, Truvia, you want to use those instead of sugar as much as you can. Swerve can replace sugar even in cooking, 1-to-1. 1 teaspoon of sugar replaced by 1 teaspoon of Swerve. It's expensive, it's worth it, all right? But you want to cut back your white sugar intake. This will also do things like if you're not creating a spike in insulin in your blood, that also stops you from needing to relieve your bladder in the middle of the night. So as much as you can, you're going to cut back. Okay, so let's get to our summary here. What have I just said? 1, you got to get rid of the midnight snacks. 2, you don't get to eat for 3 hours before bed. Just be kind to yourself. Bed at 10 p.m. means stop eating at 7 p.m. 3, now you may need to talk to your doctor, and you certainly must take your medications if you take them at night. So please talk to your doctor if this is a problem. But if you can, you're going to limit water and you're going to limit drinks as possible for 1 hour before sleep. But please consult your doctor if you have any questions on this. 4, stop the caffeine. If you can stop it altogether, that's great, but you certainly don't want to have it after 12 noon. And 5, you need to really reduce your intake of white sugar, especially after 12 noon, and it would be best if you could eliminate it altogether. Okay, so there you go. A few more hints on how to sleep better, habits you need to sleep better at night consistently. Everybody, thanks for tuning in. Don't forget, if you'd like to drop me a tip, you can use my coffee account in the meantime. Everybody stay safe, take care of each other, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.